Well, the time has come to put all of these wonderful lighting concepts that you have learned, all this great information, you're now going to put it to use in an actual design project. And in this case, it's going to be a kitchen and dining area of your own invention. And first of all, you can choose any client you want. Some people choose themselves, actually, or someone famous is actually kind of a fun way to do it. Choose a baseball player or an actor, or whatever it is that rows your boat. The idea is you do need to kind of come up with some design goals. So you can, of course, come up with your own goals for yourself, but you can also come up with some lifestyle goals for, who knows, some famous people. Anyway, the great thing about the lighting project is there are so many different kinds of needs that go into this sort of space. There's a need for daylight, for ambient lighting, focal lighting, task lighting, sparkle, decorative lighting. Kind of depends on all the different situations that you need. And in a dining and kitchen area, especially in our modern lives with a modern family, there are just so many different types of activities that go on that need support from the lighting conditions. And that the kitchen and dining area is often the center of household life anyway, so it is nice to be able to support that and create an interesting aesthetic that's supported by your lighting design. Finally, there is a huge range of possible materials, and as we have learned, the types of materials can really be strongly impacted by the way you light them. So let's take a look at some the details of the project, which is basically the idea is that you will have one set of lighting equipment in this kitchen, which you can control using dimming to essentially create scenes. And you can imagine theatrical scenes, but in this case, they will be scenes for different activities of family life. And this is quite common in a residential setting. In fact, when we learned about dimming and lighting controls, we know that lighting controls are quite complex, and you can have preset scenes available via apps or via remote controls or via buttons on the wall. And in fact, those of you who've been in VPAC 206, you've probably seen all those buttons on the wall. Well, that's exactly what these are. And I have some suggestions of what you can choose for your family. And I am suggesting that it's a family of 4, just because it makes it easy to have requirements for number of chairs. And also, obviously, a family dinner doesn't make sense if it's just one person living alone. But either way, choose or invent 4 different scenes for your kitchen that you'd like to try to render. Here are some suggestions from me. Things like family breakfast or family dinner. Romantic dinner, holiday buffet, food preparation, after-school snack and homework, a real estate tour, a cleanup mode, and then finally, maybe a midnight scene. Again, you would want to consider who these people are that you're designing for, and which of these scenes or other scenes might be appropriate for them. So. And the things that you should include, well, I hope most of you are fairly familiar with the kitchen. They typically have a sink, fridge, and stove in the sort of magic triangle. I know that's not a strict rule, but anyway, counter and prep space, storage space, sculleries and that sort of thing, pantries, and then a place to eat. Presumably, for each of you, whatever type of family it is, you'll need to provide either a separate dining area or something that is sort of attached or semi-attached to the kitchen area. I'll leave that decision up to you. However, consider that if you are having something like a romantic dinner, that it may not be nearly as romantic sitting at the counter next to the Cuisinart. If you're, although I don't know, maybe that's what counts as romantic these days. So anyway, other things too that you will need in your building are things like walls, windows, and doors. This does not have to be a complete building, but you do need to have enough context so that we don't sort of see the vast empty area that is in outer space beyond our models. You should, for example, if you see a view out a window in your breakfast nook, you should see something out that window or make it dark enough that we don't notice that there's nothing out there. So, and most of our rendering software allows us to put in things like trees or mountains or whatnot. So anyway, there are other things that you can add or consider beyond the sort of minimal requirements of it actually being a kitchen. Breakfast nooks, separate dining area, as I mentioned, a large eat-in counter, very popular these days. You know, these giant 5-foot wide counters or 5-foot deep counters that allow for a laptop and a plug and all this kind of stuff that people use nowadays when they're doing their homework while kitchen prep, dining prep is also going on. Glass cabinets are great because you can have internal lighting. That's really cool. Wall ovens, special cooktops, all sorts of great things, and obviously microwaves, wine cellars, multiple sinks. Finally, a niche for a sculpture if you so desire. I believe one of the videos I have for this particular project does show niche lighting. No matter what, you are going to need a decorative fixture for your project also. That's part of your kind of design constraints. So anyway, and a couple lighting strategies to consider. Now, at this point, you have seen in precedents and in other examples all sorts of strategies, and it kind of comes down to there's not that many out there. Downlights obviously are the simplest and most familiar, and as you know, those can be round or square. They can be deeply recessed to avoid glare, and the aperture can be everything from 1 inch up to 8 inches. There's all sorts of options for recessed downlights. There's also track mounted downlights. Under cabinet or under counter lighting, over cabinet lighting, what happens above those cabinets, it's all a mystery up there. Wall and ceiling washers, which can be mounted in any number of locations. Of course, decorative pendant lights, the most typical thing that you see is over the kitchen counter or over a dining table. In-cabinet lighting, even internally lit wine cellars. A lot of fixtures that we buy have their own lights inside them, including the kitchen fan, the stove fan. So let's take a look at some examples here. I'm not going to dwell on each one, but just to show you in the context of a kitchen what some different things look like. And absolutely, I'm a firm believer that if you're not sure where to go with your design, look at some of these designs. I also have a link to a Pinterest page, and and there is this thing called the internet that you can use to find inspiration. Also, I'm a big fan of SketchUp and using the 3D warehouse, and you can just go to the 3D warehouse and type in cool contemporary kitchen examples and start with that, right? Why reinvent the wheel completely? Of course, you do want your own design aesthetic, and you can see this is a very nice design aesthetic. But anyway, okay, back to downlighting. You can see here, we don't actually see the downlights, but you can see their effect, which is a very nicely lit counter, but also the cabinets in the back have almost a grazing light on them that shows off that kind of wrinkly texture. Typically, your downlights, or as we know, downlights can be downlight wall washers or even downlight corner wall washers. Think about that as you go. If you have interesting materials that you want to show off, you need to squeeze in downlights in order to show off that material. But you also need downlights over work surfaces. Absolutely, you need downlights over work surfaces. We're working with knives, and they have to have good color rendering because we're working with food, which should look good. Anyway, and as I mentioned, these downlights, the placement of them, you have to coordinate those with the fixtures. So for example, in this case, you can see there's a downlight over the sink, or at least I think there's a downlight over the sink. And then there's internal lighting over the stove, essentially downlights over the stove. What I don't see, I guess those probably are downlights over the island. And here, again, tiny little kitchen and downlights strategically placed. There is this tendency to want an even grid of downlights. And in this case, they've created a lowered soffit to receive those downlights. I would say it looks great in a reflected ceiling fan to have an even grid, but in reality, like those downlights should be centered over the island, not kind of evenly throughout the space, because you don't necessarily need light over the part where you're walking. You need much more light over that countertop. A little pet peeve of mine. Downlights can be recessed in all sorts of situations. However, resist the temptation to put downlights into beams. That's not a good idea because beams are solid. And in this case, it's also funny that they've recessed it into this wood-paneled ceiling, a typical kind of cabin construction. The flooring from the second floor is, if you look up at it from below, is that wood paneling. So you can imagine there'd be a light sticking up through the floor on the second floor. Now, modern construction techniques, probably, obviously in this case, there's hollow area, or these are surface-mounted puck type of light fixtures. But anyway, all sorts of options. And the trim on these downlights, there's so many different options. Again, the catalogs are just filled with square ones, rectangular ones, big aperture, small aperture with a big escutcheon around it, or trim plate. So that's so many options. It's almost too much. And decorative lighting, of course, we know all about decorative lighting. That's the one that's the star. But beware, because these decorative lights, and you have to invent your own, right? You have to create your own design for a light fixture. Make sure that you do something which is in keeping with the aesthetics of the space. Not too kitschy, but just the right amount of kitschy, because, of course, it's a kitchen, but also it needs to somehow work with the aesthetics of the space. Looking at this space, I actually really think it's a visual joke that there's a beam running through what essentially is supposed to look like a chimney over the stove, but you can't run a beam through a chimney. Oops. But anyway, whatever. So, like I said, the aesthetics of these custom luminaires can be so powerful, and that's why it's such an interesting design problem. And most of these, you'll see, they're either over the countertop or over the dining area. This is a separate dining area. And getting those two to match, of course, it is typical to have something over the counter. I sometimes feel like these compete with each other. However, if you turn one set off and the other set on, I can imagine that perhaps the competition wouldn't be quite as severe. And these aesthetics, there's all sorts of fun things you can do with these decorative fixtures. I actually really love these sort of industrial chic, oversized fixtures over the counter. It's kind of a fun thing. Or they can be integrated with kitchen racks. This one, I just liked it because I disliked it, because where do you center the fixture? Is it centered, or fixtures, over the counter? Or do you center them on the window, or do you center them on the cabinet? The counter is actually not even with the cabinet underneath it on the island, so kind of a mystery. I'm not sure I agree with this, because it doesn't feel like they're centered on anything. I think I would center them over the counter, but that's just me. And this one, I actually honestly can't understand this kitchen at all. But they have two sets of dangly lights over two island countertops. I've never seen that before. I think that's actually weird. But anyway, there's all sorts of other places that you can sneak in lighting, including over the cabinets. In this case, they actually have a crown molding over the cabinets, which is, again, probably a little bit too much. But I particularly like the under-counter lighting with LED strips that we have seen. You can really sneak those into very tiny areas, and they can make for very dramatic lighting effects. Anyway, again, using these fixtures, there's so many interesting combinations of decorative fixtures, and particularly in those spaces where there is a separate dining area. And this one in particular, imagine the exposure must have been a nightmare for the photographer, because they have daylighting coming in through the window. They have a decorative fixture over the table that you can see as lit up. And then finally, you can see the lights over the counter also lit up. So fun stuff. And of course, you can go and do things like the bare bulb look. I like this. Also has an industrial chic kind of look to it, and a lovely skylight. Again, kind of interesting combinations of materials and lighting effects. Also, this one, again, very simple, kind of minimalist look. Here they really show off the materials, and so a big kind of simple fixture is in order, and in this case, it's right over the cooking area. Probably could use some downlights over that very dark countertop. But anyway, the other thing that I was going to mention in this particular image is the escutcheon, how the fixture attaches to the ceiling. This is a honkin' huge light fixture. I mean, it's the size of the stove, probably 30 inches at least, probably a 30-inch stove or cooktop. And so the escutcheon up at the ceiling becomes a pretty big design element. And in this case, the ceiling is just looks like a textured plaster. So you're really going to want to think about that when you design your fixture. These dangly fixtures, the bigger they get, the more impact there is from the kind of attachment system and, of course, the wires and all that kind of stuff. So another thing to think about is daylighting. And as we have learned, daylighting is actually really important, and important for any number of reasons, including health, but also we do inhabit our interior spaces sometimes during the day. And something like a breakfast nook, if that's important to you, you want to make sure that the daylighting is well considered, that the placement of the furniture and the other light fixtures complement that daylighting. You can use daylighting also to create dramatic textures, dramatic shadows, or just a view. I mean, the classic thing is the kitchen sink with a view out to the yard in a sort of private residence. That's you kind of always see that, although not always, because here's a stove by the window, which actually is interesting in that you don't see that all that much. But some people have a real negative response to downdraft stoves that you put in islands. So there you go. Anyway, each of these natural lighting effects can be from a window on a space or from coming in through a side room. And of course, we have fancy schmancy rendering software that can make all this look super duper cool. And the more complex the space gets, the more your opportunities for kind of interesting and unique lighting effects. In this case, there's basically a light shelf reflecting light up into the ceiling, which is all white and kind of pristine, that gets reflected down into the rest of the space. So finally, under counter lighting and cabinet lighting, these are great options, and honestly, it's the kind of thing where if you consider even for a moment aging in place, and if you remember how much your light your vision acuity goes down as you age, really having this under cabinet lighting is so helpful for prep as we get older. Lighting can be dimmed, and of course you also need to have things like outlets hidden under these under cabinet areas, so you're going to have electrical stuff anyway. Absolutely, under cabinet lighting is such an improvement on these spaces. And finally, the in cabinet lighting, you don't necessarily have to see inside the cabinet itself. Here, actually, I have some more examples of in-cabinet lighting. Here we go. There's some good ripply glass. So the glass is actually an opportunity for all sorts of effects that are just impossible to achieve with any other material. It's such a unique thing. Or you can do stuff like show off your collection of wine. Apparently, it's all the same bottle. Or you can just get an interesting texture. Again, glass is such a wonderful material when you consider how it interacts with light. That's why we use so much glass in our light fixtures, our custom luminaires, and even something as simple as just a shelf with the addition of lighting can make for such an interesting kind of sparkly effect. In this case, a very minimal design, but the transparency of the glass and the in-line shelf lighting really makes for interesting, simple effect. And here, same thing. In fact, what I like about this one is you can see the placement of the strip of light is towards the front end of the shelf. And you can actually see the top shelf. There's a slot that was cut for the LED lighting. And that absolutely is the best way to do it, because when you want to shield the light, So placing it towards the front with a little lip is the way to go. And here's another example of a dramatic lip that you can see. You're looking at the cabinet. You can't see the light at all. If you look to the left over the sink, it is not quite as well shielded, so that's not quite as successful. So finally, you're going to have all these different light sources in your space. They're all installed at the same time, but for the different scenes, you're going to have to balance each of these lights, turn up one, turn down the other, and absolutely that's kind of the duh part of design, trying to find a way to make the scene look moody and capture the essence of whatever it is that you picture going on at that moment. Like this particular scene, not good for food prep, right? There's no lighting on the under cabinet area. There's no lighting on over the counter. I'm sure those lights are in the space somewhere. Certainly, there's a fan over the stove. I'm sure that there's a light in that fan. There always is. There might even be lights in the stove, in the wall-mounted units there. But they're all turned down, so this is kind of like an evening view. Like, oh, we've all retired to the drawing room, and that's the effect. Whereas other spaces, maybe food prep, this is the food prep lighting scene, and there's very nice lighting over the counter, but you also have some decorative effects up in the kind of cove lighting or over soffit lighting, over cabinet lighting, all sorts of interesting effects going on. And turning these on and off, this is kind of, getting them in there, of course, and thinking about them is problem number one. And problem number two is figuring out how to balance all those different kind of effects. Here's a slightly different take. Again, there's a kind of dangly, almost industrial-looking fixture over the counter, but you can see that counter is well lit, the island. And a similar linear fixture that's kind of washing the wall, not quite as effective for counter lighting. There's definitely some shadows. It's not that big a counter anyway, but it does make for a lovely texture on the wall. Or this one, which, again, I'm not a big fan of the bright colors myself, but I have to admit that it does make a kind of dramatic sculptural shape up in the ceiling. Also, the pin lights up in the ceiling, the pin down lights, because they are following, I'm not sure what they're following, to tell you the honest truth. I thought for a moment they were following the counter, but I'm not so sure. But anyway, they do make a kind of really, I don't know, like a starlit sky kind of effect. Maybe they are following the counter. I don't know. It requires a little study. So anyway, anytime you have light colors and dark colors in the same area, also very tricky to balance. As we have learned, the reflectance of different materials is dramatically different, and how much light comes off of them. In this case, they have a very light countertop for the sink area, but then the kind of adjacent island of presumably seating, that must be a 50,000-pound slab of granite, is very dark. So I would guess that the power output has to be balanced between that light fixture over the eat-in counter and the prep area, just because of the reflectance of those different materials. Or you could get rid of that problem by just going all white. Everything is all white, and again, our software is going to balance that for us. So finally, have fun. This is a very simple project. One room, or and it's up to you if you want more rooms or not. That's fine, but basically one rendering should be able to show the whole project. That would be the ideal. So do something that you wouldn't do with a normal client. Some of these images almost certainly are not real projects, although maybe, I don't know, there's all sorts of crazy stuff out there. Come up with something that is an aesthetic that you think matches your client's need, and maybe you need to choose a client that is going to have some, I don't know, Art Deco or industrial chic or steampunk, whatever is the in style these days. I don't really know, but absolutely, you can start with one of these examples, and don't be afraid to come up with things that are interesting up in the ceiling, for example, arches and beams and that sort of stuff. There's all sorts of opportunities for great stuff. And that's why I have you sketch first rather than jump right into the computer, because I think sometimes we're just like, oh, I don't know how to make that. I don't know how to make that in the extrudiverse that is Revit world, or it's not in the 3D warehouse in SketchUp world. So anyway, have fun with this design, and again, think through where the lighting fixtures are going to be, where the decorative fixtures are going to be, how are you going to get lighting onto the different surfaces, and then how are you going to accommodate different activities. Obviously, the photos that I'm showing you, these are adjusted to make the best photograph. They're not necessarily going to be the best scenes for different types of activities, and each of these scenes should be unique. It should be clear that one is different than the other. So, what to do next? Well, the first part is to just begin a sketch. And I'd like you to sketch in plan and section. You can do it by hand. You can do it on the iPad. I don't really care. You can use it in Illustrator or in whatever Illustrator equivalent that you like to use. That doesn't really matter to me. But the big thing is get in the main elements in your sketch and try it out, right? Try out different ideas for where the counter should be, the base cabinet should be eat in or eat on. Do you want a sink or fridge? Do you want a wall niche for an Academy Award because you're designing for some famous actor? Any of these other main elements, sketch those in. And here's some examples. The student actually began kind of sketching out the space and then came up with some sectional ideas of what kind of ceiling she might want to have, and even started sketching in some light fixtures just to kind of get some ideas. And absolutely, like a little yellow highlighter, or if it's on the computer, a little yellow blotch, is very helpful to kind of think through some kind of strategy. And in this case, for each individual scene, once you've got a basic layout of the sketch, you can kind of do a quick sketch for each scene, and obviously deciding which scenes you might want to have. And a couple of things to consider is you have control of the shape of the space. So whatever your design process is, you can absolutely begin, probably in this case, because it is really purely an interiors project, begin with the kitchen area and the counter, if you want an island or a U-shaped whatever, and then I'll add in, I think I want a separate dining area. Is it an extension of the counter? Is it a freestanding standalone? And if you're like, I don't know where to begin, find an image that you like, either from the slideshow or from the internet, and sketch out that plan, right? And then adapt it for your own needs. There's absolutely no reason to, kitchens are not unusual. we see millions of them all over the place. But finally, consider your ceiling as an opportunity for creating either interesting spatial effects or interesting lighting effects up there. So like I said, sketch the plan and section, and then the lighting strategies for at least 4 different scenes. So that can be by hand, and you can scan it in any which way you want using your phone or whatever, but post that. And then I'm sure all of you are going to need to jump right into the computer, because we have basically 1 week to do a pretty complicated project. And I actually can't remember what kind of software everybody knows and is using. I have no idea anymore, frankly. So basically, I don't care how you make this project. I just care what it looks like when you're done. I, of course, am a big fan of SketchUp Pro, and for a purely interiors project, one that's a small project like this, SketchUp Pro is great, right? It's very flexible, easy to navigate, giant 3D warehouse with lots of furnishings and fun things, and it's very easy to create custom objects with interesting geometry in SketchUp because it's just so flexible. Now, if you don't have SketchUp Pro, because maybe you learned it in your first year as a grad student or in your freshman year as an undergrad, I totally understand. That doesn't mean you can't use the free online 3D warehouse. and the 3D Warehouse and SketchUp, all you need to do is have a login to use the free version. There's some limitations, but you can download those 3D models, and you can edit them, right? You can change them as need be. And that's, again, great for things in the 3D Warehouse, but also things like custom countertops. Anytime you have a profile on an edge, for example, that's a little tricky in Revit. It absolutely can be done, but it's a little bit of a pain in the butt. And things like a light fixture, again, you can absolutely do that in Revit, but there is this sometimes this feeling that things just end up being combinations of extruded objects in Revit because it's so easy to extrude objects, whereas SketchUp, it's a little easier to have some different stuff. But anyway, all right, enough for advertising SketchUp. Revit, the big thing with Revit, obviously it makes lovely floor plans and RCPs and all that kind of stuff. Controlling lighting is a real pain. I think we know that. Aiming lighting, it's just a pain in the what. So consider that. But on the other hand, when you think of how are you going to render this project is really all about rendering, because rendering is lighting and materials, and lighting design is all about lighting and materials. So there you go. And it gets quite complex. So interestingly enough, the Revit internal lighting system actually has great controls for setting up lighting scenes. Let me show you what I mean. So here's a Revit model. This is actually a model from a much larger video that I have on aiming lighting in Revit that I'll link to in the assignment. But you can see there's downlights and wall washers and all sorts of great stuff. Anyway, if you go to the render menu, the little teapot, which is down here, and it's also on the view menu, render, what you'll see down here is the artificial lights menu. And this is specific to every 3D view. So absolutely, if you make a new 3D view, you can have an entirely different dimming scheme. And you can see here, I've turned off some lights, so they're kind of grayed out. You just turn them on and off with this little button. You can also choose the dimming kind of percentage here. 0 obviously means off, and 1 is 100%. So I could create a scene with a lot of the lights off, and then some dimmed to left at 100%, and then some here dimmed at 70%. You can group lightings, and if you click on the lights or the groups, they'll actually show up here in your reflected ceiling plan. You'll see them. I'm not really in the optimal view for showing all these. So it's actually really handy. And you can use the online cloud rendering system. You can render pretty much all of your different scenes. And I have a whole bunch of scenes here: homework and dinner prep, midnight snack, RCP. It took a lot of effort to get the model to work properly, get the downlights to work properly. It's actually, no small source of misery, but the renderings look really good. And so those of you who are most comfortable just rendering inside Revit, I'd say go with this option. However, there are other options. I know a lot of you like rendering with Enscape, which is great. And of course, you do have to get the lighting to work in Revit in order for Enscape to work. And the trick with Enscape is that you will need 4 distinct Revit projects to create the 4 different scenes. Enscape does not support the kind of scene dimming that occurs in Revit. Revit's internal rendering system. So basically, you have to set up your lighting for one scene, get all the equipment in there, essentially for all 4 scenes. But then in one scene, dim and adjust each of the properties, the family properties of the lighting, and then save that project under a new name, maybe scene number 2, and adjust everything again. And so it's a little bit of a pain in the tush. But anyway, SketchUp files, if you're rendering those with Enscape, you do need to use the Enscape lighting, which is pretty good. Enscape lighting is actually pretty good. If you use my current favorite, which is Lumion, it does not use any Revit lighting at all, which is like, oh, what a bummer. On the other hand, the Revit lighting, half the time it doesn't work right anyway. So And it is much, much easier to place and aim lights in the Lumion interface. Really easy to aim lights. And the way that you create scenes in Lumion is you basically put all your light sources. There's a single button that you can press to select all the light sources in your project. You can make a group out of them. And then use layers. Turn off one group, turn on another group, and you can control each of the lights individually or in banks. So either way, I think you'll have to decide which ones you know how to use or which ones you want to know how to use. I do find that Lumion, for my money, is the most flexible, and the reason it's the most flexible is because it's very easy to put SketchUp objects into Revit and render them successfully in Lumion. Those of you who have tried this in either Revit's internal rendering or with Inkscape, you know it's not easy to get SketchUp objects to render, so you tend not to use them. But because there's so much furniture in that 3D warehouse, and getting objects from Revit City, they're kind of notoriously cranky to get materials to work correctly. Using that 3D warehouse, it's really nice. And it's quite easy. You just, even if you don't have SketchUp, you can just use the free version, find good stuff, download it onto your computer, and it can be loaded directly into Revit. And Lumion allows you to change the materials on those objects. You just click on the material. It does have to be painted in SketchUp. So you know, obviously you want to make sure that everything is painted, but once it is painted, Lumion is more than happy to allow you to change the material. So SketchUp to Revit is good. Interesting enough, you can also go the other way, Revit to SketchUp. The newest version of SketchUp Pro allows you to import whole Revit projects into SketchUp. It is a one-way process, so once they're in SketchUp, that's it. And they absolutely can respect all of the Revit elements. If you import it, it keeps the walls and the ceilings and the floors as groups. And this actually is a really good way. One of the undergrads was telling me, not in your group, but that she actually will make an outline of the space with all the wall thicknesses and everything in Revit, and then bring it into SketchUp. And because it's so much easier to do things like make a soffit, you can push pull, you can draw right on surfaces, which you can kind of do in Revit, but as you know, it's not. So as an example of why that might be handy, here's good old Revit, and I created this little box here with a floor and a ceiling kind of connected to this object. And if you do it that way, you see how the floor stretches with the ceiling, you know, it kind of has that SketchUp stickiness to it. You can adjust heights of things parametrically really quickly. And then if you have SketchUp Pro, you can just go to File, Import, and assuming the versions match, you can just import this right into SketchUp Pro. You can also export this as a DWG file. DWG is the AutoCAD file format. You don't even need AutoCAD on your computer, but you need to export it as a DWG, and that can be brought into the full version of SketchUp or the web-based version. Let's take a look at that. And if you haven't seen it, it's just web-based SketchUp. Full screen that guy, and here you go. Here's my model, and this works very similar to SketchUp. The full version of SketchUp. There's all sorts of tools in here, all the ones that you're probably familiar with, and you can open up the model, you can insert things, and most importantly, you can go to the 3D warehouse, which is right over here, and it looks just like the 3D warehouse that we're all familiar with, and you can type in whatever you want here. I'll type in cool kitchen, and let's see what we find here. Nice thing about 3D warehouse or pain in the tush thing about it is it does have products. So these are actual products if you want, which you can scroll through here. I never seem to find anything really good. But anyway, you can go to models or collections. There's all sorts of ways that you can generate things. And well, here you go. There's my kitchen. All right, I'm done. I'll just submit that, and I'm done with my project. But obviously, this is a great way if you're just like, I don't even know where to begin. This is another way that you can kind of get things going, and then change it as you need be. And once you're in SketchUp, and again, this is just the online version, most things work in a similar way. You can turn on and off the section plane. I guess my section is a little low here. There's all sorts of things that you can do to navigate your model. And of course, it's editable. This was my Revit model. If you've ever tried to cut a hole in a wall, you know that, or build a niche in a wall, it's actually kind of hard in Revit. It's just a little tricky. But here in SketchUp, we can quickly create an opening if we want to create an opening, if you want to make some kind of profile around the window trim or something like that. You can use Follow Me to generate a profile. If you wanted to add even just a simple bullnose trim to a counter, well, you know, in Revit you have all these things you have to do. You have to make a sweep and sweep the void along the edge of the countertop. I mean, it's just a huge pain. But in SketchUp, these things are a lot easier. So, okay, maybe, you know, you don't want to do everything in SketchUp and you just want to get something from the 3D warehouse into your Revit model. That's pretty easy. You just click the little hamburger menu there and choose Download SKP. It will purge stuff automatically, which is kind of good because sometimes there's weird stuff in that SketchUp model. And then let's go to Revit and import it. So here we are in Revit. You're definitely going to want to go to a plan view, and you can hide all this other stuff if you don't want to see it. But anyway, the big question is, do you want to link your file or import your file? And I'm not sure that I may make additional changes to the SketchUp model, which you can't do in Revit. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to link it. And when you're searching for your file, it's probably in the downloads folder. Make sure you use SketchUp files, and there you go. There's your file. The other thing is when you import it, make sure that you position it. I usually do manual center because I didn't really check to see where the origin is in the SketchUp model, and especially 3D warehouse stuff. It can be sketchy especially if you're used to Revit City. So anyway, I'll choose the center of the model, place it on the ground level, and here you go. It goes right into your model, and it may have some unsupported geometry, which would kind of suck. But let's take a look at this in perspective here, just to see what we we have wrought. Oh, I may have my ceiling a little bit low, but basically that's bringing your model in. There we go. I adjusted things. I think the scale may actually be off in this particular model here. But anyway, you can see there you go is your beautiful model. All of the materials have kind of come in, and I have separate videos on if you're rendering in Revit how to manage materials from SketchUp objects. It's actually kind of complicated. However, if you're using my favorite new program, Lumion, let me show you how to do that. And as you can see, it's not all that exciting here in Lumion. I did paint the walls, some materials. But in Lumion, if I just click on materials, you see how it does respect the SketchUp materials. So for example, if I wanted to change this backsplash, apparently they've modeled each tile separately, but not this one. And I can change the cabinets all in one get-go, just using whatever SketchUp material or Lumion materials that you'd like. Can never decide what I want, but here let's see if we can pick one. Oops, click the wrong material here. There we go. I don't know what all these are. Ever motion wood. I don't know what that is. That's pretty funky. Okay, so anyway, obviously you have all the Lumion controls, and you can go to settings, and you can fiddle around with all the great stuff that is in Lumion. But let's say you want those cabinet doors to have, I don't know, glass in the panels. Oh no, how are you going to do that? Well, you've got to go back to the original SketchUp file. So let's go there. And here we are, and we have to come in here, and we're going to paint these little panels. Let's find a material. What is this? Chipboard. We'll go to glass. Let's go glass, and we'll choose here. We'll choose a nice stylish glass. It doesn't matter really, because all it has to be is a different material in Lumion, and we can come in and paint these in Lumion. So you can paint it a solid color, which is actually fine as an option. But anyway, here in SketchUp, I'm going to save it, re-download it. So download SKP, and you can see it started, and it'll probably take just a second. And then back in Revit, well, it still looks the same. So what you do, go back to your Insert menu and choose Manage Links. And SketchUp, they don't have their own tab. Darn it! They're in the CAD formats. You can just choose Reload and Original Model. It gives you the same warning message. It's probably some curves or something. And in theory, we should be seeing a different model. Oh, except I think maybe when I downloaded it, it came in as a different file name. So let's try that. Reload from, oh yeah, it did. It came in as a separate file name. Didn't replace the original. And OK, and then OK. And now you can see that your objects have changed. And then if you go to Lumion, you should see the change also. And lo and behold, there's the updated glass. So obviously, quite a few steps to using these SketchUp models. But gosh, are they handy for things like kitchen cabinets and furniture and simple objects. So that would be my recommended workflow. Get in all the walls and doors and windows in either Revit or SketchUp, whatever your preference is, but probably most of you are going to use Revit. So use the floors, ceilings, doors, windows in Revit. Model things like soffits using masses or in-place components. And then if you need kitchen objects like custom cabinets and countertops and stoves and that sort of stuff, you will find a lot more options in the 3D warehouse. Just manage them by creating a nice folder for yourself in your project and downloading everything into that so that you can update the files as I demonstrated. Anyway, however you do your project, you have to begin at the beginning and produce your sketches for the floor plan and section layout initially, and then take it from there.